In this session, we want to consider the first attribute of God to which we want to fix our attention. That attribute is the self-existence of God. Some refer to it as the aseity of God, that God has all life in himself. God is not dependent upon anyone or anything. We as his creatures are entirely dependent upon him. The life that we have, both physical and spiritual, has been derived from him. It is in God that we live and move and have our being. But God does not derive life from anyone or anything else. God is self-sufficient. God is self-contained in that sense. God has life in himself. That is our focus in this session. By way of introduction, let me say again that there is no higher subject that any mind can ever contemplate than the subject of the study of God. And no truth is so mind-expanding, and no truth is so heart-enlarging, and no truth is so life-changing as the study of God. In 1855, a mere 20-year-old preacher in London, England, who was to become the prince of preachers, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, stood in the pulpit as he began his exposition of Malachi 3:6. And in the introduction, this 20-year-old young preacher said these profound words: "There is something exceedingly improving to the mind in a contemplation of the divinity. It is a subject so vast that all of our thoughts are lost in its immensity, so deep that our pride is drowned in its infinity. Other subjects we can comprehend and grapple with. In them we feel a kind of self-content and go on our way with the thought, 'Behold, I am wise.' But when we come to this master science, finding that our plumb line cannot sound its depth and that our eagle eye cannot see its height, we turn away with the solemn exclamation, 'I am of but yesterday and know nothing.' But while the subject humbles the mind, it also expands it. Nothing will so enlarge the intellect, nothing so magnify the whole soul of man as a devout, earnest, continuing investigation of the great subject of the deity." Close quote. Spurgeon was right. He hit the target. There is no subject so humbling as the study of the subject of God. We stand, as it were, as a moth on the surface of the sun, gazing into the brilliant, shining glory of the sun, and realize that we are but nothing. And at the same time, no subject so energizes us, so infuels our faith and builds us up and edifies us. No subject so comforts us and consoles us as a study of the subject of God. And that is our focus. Now, the Westminster Shorter Catechism, written in 1647, sets forth this following statement of faith regarding God. God is spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being. Wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. Close quote. That is but a summary of the essence and the attributes of God. We want to now begin our focus on these attributes with the main lead attribute that uniquely distinguishes God, his self-existence. The Bible begins with this simple statement in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Before creation, God was already in existence. God was already in existence as we look back into eternity past. In fact, there has never been a time when God did not exist. Psalm 93:2 says, "Your throne is established from of old." We would ask, how old is the throne of God? The second line of this verse tells us, "You are from everlasting." That's impossible for us to wrap our mind around that thought. We have all had a beginning. You can pull out your driver's license and see the date of your birth. We can go to a cemetery and see the year someone was born and the year that they died. But not so with God. He is without beginning. He is without end. In fact, we know that God existed from before the foundation of the world, from before time began. We read in Micah 5:2 of Christ the Messiah, his goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. Now, what that means is when Jesus came, he stepped out of eternity and into time. All of these verses indicate his eternal existence, that God is uncreated. He is the uncreated creator. He is uncaused. One other verse in the Psalms, Psalm 90, verse 2. "Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." From eternity past to eternity future and everything in between, God is God. So we can conclude at no point did God not exist. There was never a time when God was not God. R.C. Sproul writes in a profound way, "If anything exists, then something has always existed. If there was ever absolutely nothing, then nothing could possibly be now, because you cannot get something out of nothing. Conversely, if there is something now, then that in and of itself demonstrates that there was always something. And that which always is exists in and of itself. That is the one who has the power of being within himself the living God." Close quote. What R.C. Sproul is saying is that because there is something now, you and me and the universe and the earth, that presupposes by necessity that there has always been something, and that something is God, the eternal God. Isaiah 43, verse 10, God says, "Before me there was no God formed, and there will be none after me." No God preceded God, nothing preceded God, and nothing will follow him as well. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A.W. Pink has written a marvelous book called The Attributes of God, and in that book, Pink writes, "There was a time, if time it could be called, when God in the unity of his nature, though subsisting equally in three divine persons, dwelt all alone. In the beginning, God. There was no heaven, where his glory is now particularly manifested. There was no earth to engage his attention. There were no angels to hymn his praises, no universe to be upheld by the word of his power. There was nothing, no one, but God. And that not for a day, a year, or an age, but from everlasting." During a past eternity, God was alone, self-contained, self-sufficient, self-satisfied, in need of nothing. Had a universe, had angels, had human beings been necessary to him in any way, they also had been called into existence from all eternity. The creating of them, when he did, added nothing to God essentially. He changes not. Therefore, his essential glory can be neither augmented nor diminished. Now listen to this. Pink concludes, God was under no constraint, no obligation, no necessity to create. That he chose to do so was purely a sovereign act on his part, caused by nothing outside of himself, determined by nothing but his own mere good pleasure. For he works all things after the counsel of his will. That he did create, Pink writes, was simply for his manifested glory. Close quote. We feel overwhelmed by thoughts like this. And that is a good place to be. It produces humility within us to think of the vastness and the greatness of our God, who has always existed and yet chose to create time and creation and the universe and even us. The more we contemplate the majesty and the greatness and the grandeur of our God, the more it humbles us. And God gives grace to the humble.